Hi there. Welcome to The Preventable, the podcast giving you a seat at the table with conversations about the intersection of alcohol, drugs, and mental health in everyday lives. Take a seat and join us.
Welcome to The Preventable. With me today are several esteemed guests, including one who is back for his third appearance. As always on The Preventable, we're so grateful for the support of Hubbard Radio. That's how we're able to do these podcasts, and that's how we're in our current third season, which is always so incredible to even stop and think about. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the third-time guest, who is John Gaal. And by this point, he might need no introduction, but I'll give it anyway. So, John, you have been a partner of Prevent+Ed's for quite some time with your work in the construction industry around mental health. And you came to me with an idea and you said, I got a podcast topic for you. So tell me and tell everybody listening, what was your idea?
Well, thank you once again for allowing me to participate in your podcast series. Nicole, I think the work you guys have done over the past few years has really made an impact on our community as well as our industry. I know that you're often out in public, and I caught you a couple months ago and said, hey, I think I got an idea for you. And that idea was basically TBIs in the construction industry. So TBIs are traumatic brain injuries. Having written on the topic as well as presented on the topic, I've come across people who have similar concerns, but come from different perspectives. But yet we all have the same goal in mind. And all of us are in the construction industry, and we have our own stories to tell. And it's not just about the stories, it's about the work that a progressive organization within the industry, a national organization, is moving the industry towards, hopefully sooner rather than later. So with that in mind, I'd like to introduce the other two panelists. There's three of us today. One of the panelists is Joseph Whiteman. He's with the American Society for Concrete Contractors. He's got his version to tell of TBIs and what he brings to the industry. And then there's Scott Greenhaus. And Scott is an engineer by trade, and he brings a different perspective, but yet we all are speaking to this issue of TBIs. Scott is going to relate his story. And of course, my story's related from a sports standpoint. So we've got an industry standpoint, we've got a military standpoint, and we got a sports standpoint. But we all come together because we're in the construction industry. And one of the things we do is we hire a lot of vets. And sometimes vets bring some baggage to the table. And that's not a bad thing. It's just something that we all need to be aware of. And I think the sooner we're aware of it and learn how to address those issues, the better. I always tell people that the time to buy a fire extinguisher is not when your house is on fire. So with that being said, I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole.
John, you're speaking. You're speaking my love language, John, because you're talking about prevention, right? And prevention is what we do at Prevent+Ed. You're right. The best time to buy a fire extinguisher is before there's a fire. The best time to wear a life jacket is before you get catapulted out of the boat and need to figure out how to swim. And what I think you're arguing is that, the best time to prevent a head injury or prevent another head injury is with some equipment, and maybe thinking through what that equipment looks like and ensuring the safety of folks. So before I turn it over, I'm going to start with you, Joseph. I think what you said, John, was so interesting about TBIs or traumatic brain injuries. A lot of times we think about them with sports or maybe like a motorcycle injury or an ATV accident or something like that. And I don't know that we always think about it in terms of um, injuries that could happen just on somebody's typical job site, right? And so I like that we're doing this to kind of draw attention to traumatic brain injuries in general, because I think it's something that's not really discussed that often, but then really more specifically. So, Joseph, could you talk a little bit about kind of like why you care so much about this issue, what brings you here today, and then also maybe some things that you're looking to do moving forward?
Yeah. Thank you again, Nicole, for the opportunity, and John, thanks for thinking about me. This obviously hits real close to home for me. First and foremost, I unfortunately, uh, it's actually a bittersweet situation for me. It was the worst thing that ever happened to me, but at the same time, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. It was the best thing that ever happened to me because I wouldn't be here today with the opportunity that I have, that was presented itself to have the most amazing career that I have. It's opened a door that I never knew ever existed, a career that I never knew it existed. So that in itself has been a blessing. I have a blessed life for that. So 20 years ago, I was in the Marine Corps. I was in Iraq. Long story short, the Reader Digest version, IED, improvised explosive device, exploded and got myself and 6 others. I had 17 pieces of shrapnel go into my face, lost my right eye. I had 4 pieces of shrapnel get shoved into the frontal lobe of my brain. So I had to have 2 craniotomies to remove the shrapnel out of my brain. Fast forward, got home, lost my right eye. Everything worked out great. Fortunately, my dad worked for a very, very large general contractor. My condition was so bad that the Marine Corps flew my parents to Germany because they didn't know I was going to survive the surgeries. In his absence, the regional safety director for the company heard about my injury after he got back, asked about my condition, asked if he could reach out and thank me for my service because he was a prior service member. Turned into a couple conversations, and after I got out, he offered me a job in safety and ran with it ever since. So here I am today, talking to you and talking about traumatic brain injuries and sharing knowledge and sharing experiences and trying to make everybody live a safer life. So here we are. But it's interesting that we're talking about the prevention of substance misuse and disorders because unfortunately, I've learned, and we've learned as the more technology gives back, traumatic brain injuries are turning out to be the gift that keeps on giving. John, I tried to reach out to you a couple weeks ago, and timing hasn't worked out, but about 5 weeks ago, about 4:45 in the morning, my wife woke up to me having a tonic-clonic, or what used to be known as a grand mal seizure. So fast forward a couple weeks, had a EEG and an MRI, and turns out that they found out that over 20 years or whatever, after having a traumatic brain injury, developing epilepsy is a common side effect. So I have now developed
Whoa.
epilepsy from this traumatic brain injury. So
Whoa.
now dealing with epilepsy, which is fine. It's manageable from, a lot of people have epilepsy. It's very easily manageable, but, that I was supposed to go within the ASCC. I had a presentation to give on beyond the injury, the effects that it has on yourself, on your family, going through the healing process. And that presentation that I was going to give has now just become the introduction to this presentation that I'm now giving on, everything else that I've learned and what we're going through. So it's there's a lot to digest, and I'm still kind of reflecting and learning and what we're doing. And there's a lot that we need to take a step back and realize that there's a lot of opportunities for people doors to open for, people to unfortunately get pushed into a system and take advantage and have the opportunity to have, uh, you know, idle hands, if you will, time to misuse and take the opportunity to take the wrong drugs. Or when I met with the neurologist, for instance, they had to put me on anti-seizure medicine, and he says, I need to know what other medication you're on so we don't have any synergistic effects. And fortunately for me, I wasn't on any. He didn't believe me, actually. He says, what other medication are you on? I said, none. He says, no, really, I need to know so we don't have synergistic effects, nothing bad happening. I looked at my wife, and she's like, none. And I said, I've never been on any other medication. He said, even after you got out of the Marine Corps? I said, no. He said, how is that possible? And for me, this is going to be a big part of this presentation that I'm working on. And I had a phenomenal, strong support system.
That's
My
right.
father, friends, family. As soon as I got out of the Marine Corps, I bought a house. I gutted the kitchen. My dad taught me how to build cabinets and woodwork. And I remember throwing wood through the walls and punching holes in the walls. And he would calm me down and we'd remeasure and I'd see where I went wrong. And, after the seizure, I'd think back and I'm like, man, that was therapy. That kept me busy. My wife
It was your
afterwards goes,
outlet.
it was my outlet, and I would have goals. And my wife used to give me a hard time because I would go from one hobby to the next or one goal to the next. She goes, I get it. You were just always having the next goal, the next thing to keep your mind busy. And that's what it was. And I think we don't talk about that enough, right? And so that's something that I really need to dive in and express and just get that message out is there's more to that next pill to keep your mind off of something. We just need to look at what else is available to us. And I'm not knocking that. And I hope I don't offend people.
No.
But there's that's certainly helpful to a lot of people, but there's also other other ways to manage.
We talk a lot on here on how to cope, right? And
yes,
that's
right.
why we begin in kindergarten teaching kiddos how to cope. It's a skill
Right.
that can be taught, and many times with adults we don't always think. We don't have a huge toolbox of coping strategies. It's coping and self-care is way more than a face mask, right? It's way more than, a beer at the end of the day. There's a lot of other things that we can do, and it's not knocking pharmaceuticals. There's a time and a place for those. But especially if you've had some sort of trauma to your brain and that has disrupted your life or your family's life, and the emotional trauma that comes with being a veteran and things that you've seen and experienced. I mean, there has to be an outlet for that. TBI aside, right? There has to be an outlet for that. Scott, what are you just like, did they just like sucker you in today? How'd you get involved in all of this? What brings you here?
Well, they didn't sucker me in, and actually feel very fortunate to have met John and interact a lot with Joe. They have very compelling stories, and I really appreciate what they're both doing in the industry to tell their stories and to make things better. And I'm part of the construction industry, executive at a construction firm, has about 3,000 people throughout the U.S. and the Middle East. We do heavy construction work. We have an engineering. We have specialty products, primarily focused on repair and restoration of concrete structures. And so why I'm here and part of this team is, construction is an extremely hazardous occupation, as we all know. And 25% of the fatalities in construction are related to traumatic brain injury. And so we know
Can you say that one more time? Can you say that one more time?
25% of the fatalities in construction are related to traumatic brain injuries from a variety of different things, falls and trips and falls, or impact, open head wounds, closed head wounds, things like that. So it's a significant problem. As I believe you mentioned, it's sort of underappreciated as a problem in the construction industry. And during most of my career in construction, I guess I sort of underappreciated it also until, our experience was a construction site on a project in Miami where we were involved in the construction of a very unique concrete structure that to get to the end collapsed during construction. And during that episode, we had several of our people on the structure when it collapsed. One of our crew died later that day from his injuries, and the foreman of our crew, who had been kind of an icon in the industry, works on these unique type of structures. He was seriously injured. suffered a severe traumatic brain injury and also had internal injuries.
Mm.
And this was all over the news, and we visited the site the next day. And one thing we noticed—
That's like your worst nightmare, right? Like as an executive for a company, that's like your worst nightmare.
It's a nightmare. And personally, I take the health and well-being of all of our people personally. I feel like I'm a steward for them and for their families. So we immediately went to the site, we visited our employee in the hospital, and on the site we noticed there was NTSB was there, and the police and the homicide unit, and it was very intimidating. But we noticed that their hard hats were on the ground, and we started to think about, well, what would there have been a different outcome had their hard hats stayed on their heads. And that launched us in a journey in looking at how do we better protect our people from head injuries. And as we launched into that journey, we noticed, and we actually knew this before, that around the world, people in construction wear something called more of a construction helmet, similar to your bike helmet, ski helmets, motorcycle helmets. Pretty much any sport that you might participate in has a helmet, football helmets. And in other places in the world, they wear helmets. In the US,
as opposed to your traditional hard hat that sits up kind of high and that falls off.
And those have been around for at least 60 years in the country.
Right, forever.
So the state of the technology is the same. And they're fine if you're going to get an impact right to the top of your head. But if you get a side impact or if you fall, it falls off your head. And so that led us to looking at, well, there is got to be something better. There is something better because everything that we do in our lives outside of our work, our hazardous construction work, we wear a helmet. Why the heck are we not wearing a helmet in construction?
Sure.
So we made a commitment to our people that we were going to research this topic, and we were going to switch from the traditional hard hats to a construction helmet. And not only that, we said, well, our people who work in construction, whether they work for us or work for anybody else, they're all our people, right? We all pull from the same pool of people, and it's not enough for us to protect our own people. We need to protect, and we want to protect everybody in the construction industry. So as we, it's easy for us to say as leadership of the company, we're going to make the change. But the next step is to say, well, we think everybody else should make the change.
Like that it should be an industry standard or an industry. Yeah. Does somebody like OSHA set that requirement, or is it more of like would it be less of a mandate and more of a companies are doing this and really opting in? Or is it maybe a mixture of both?
No, it's a great question. So OSHA does set the standard for protective equipment. In this case, they happen to refer to another organization called ANSI. And ANSI specification calls for the traditional hard hat. So in order to change that, it's usually OSHA usually pushes for more strict standards, and they're usually pushed against by industry. So OSHA picks their fights,
Sure.
And so we said, well, we do want the legislative part of it to change. We're going to change the paradigm. We in industry are going to push OSHA to have a more strict standard.
Right, you're like flipping it on its head there. Yeah.
It's flipping it on its head, and we've been up to Capitol Hill, and people are saying, well, I don't get what you're doing. I don't understand this. It's never happened before.
Right. You want something more strict? You want the government to be more strict. Interesting.
You want something more strict. So that kind of freaks them out because they're not used to that. It's a different paradigm. But But so that's a long process.
Yeah.
The short
Right.
process is we want to start saving lives today.
Today.
And that's a journey that we've been on. Joe's been on that journey. John's helped us with this journey to get the word out and work with other organizations, trade associations, right down to individual mom and pop companies,
Right.
talking to them about what is the features and benefits of the helmets, why you should make the change, and attempting to overcome the objections to
Right.
make
So
the change.
that's what I was going to ask you about. And so in preparing for this episode, I was thinking about people that I know in the industry. And as I've shared on this podcast before, I grew up in a construction family. My dad worked in construction, started as a laborer, ended up, running a construction company. All of his friends were superintendents, laborers, whatever, you name it. It was that. And I remember going to job sites and honestly, rarely seeing people wearing hard hats unless the boss was there. I was then kind of thinking in my head, we currently have a staff member who was working in construction and suffered a TBI on the construction site that nearly ended his life and assuredly ended his career in construction. And to your point, Joe, he still suffers with lots of residual effects. They tried to pump him with pain meds, and he was a person in long-term recovery and said, no, thank you. But that battle is still being waged, right? I mean, his health is still severely affected. And I can't even believe I didn't think about this, but 2 months ago, I was having construction done on my house. I have a kind of a traditional city 3-story, and we had the roof was being replaced, and one of the roofers fell off the roof onto the concrete pad below. And I get a call saying, ambulance is here. Their rope broke. He wasn't wearing a helmet. And this gentleman is still in the hospital. I mean, the bones can be fixed. He is alive, and that's great. But he's had tremendous, damage to his head and his brain. And this is me as somebody who, I don't work in the construction industry, and I was able to come up with 3 anecdotes related to this. That's odd. And it shows to me how pervasive this challenge really is. And I'm curious about pushback. Are helmets, when I was growing up, kids didn't really wear bike helmets. Now, bike helmets are cool, right? And you put stickers on them, and they're the kind that look like the Mohawks, and there's all kinds of cool stuff. And if you don't wear a helmet right now and you're a kid, it's kind of like, where'd your helmet go? So do you see that tide is changing? Do some people say, I don't want to, it's annoying, it's troublesome, I'd rather just go without it? Do some people just like the traditional hard hats? Where's any pushback coming from besides the government folks that are saying, wait, you want us to be more strict? But where else is it coming from?
So, so you mentioned your bike experience. So I'm a biker, I'm a skier. And, when our kids were little, none of us wore helmets.
No.
Then we said, okay, maybe we should do this for our kids. And then as adults, we said, hey, we got to set a good example.
Right.
And you go skiing today, and it's very, very rare to see anybody skiing without a helmet. I mean, it's very rare. So it's been adopted. In construction, the hard hat, and you know this from your experience with your family, there's very little that differentiates a construction worker from another construction worker. It's their hard hat. And they put stickers on there. This is my journey in construction. And so they're very attached to that. And when we think of construction workers, very proud, group of people, then they think of their hard hat. That's what makes the whole person, right? It's part of you.
It's the look. It's the image. Yes.
Exactly. So yes, there's it's a change. Anything's a change. And what we've worked hard to do, so the helmets are more comfortable than hard hats. That's I think been established. They're more flexible. There's accessories that you can put on it, earmuffs, face shield,
Okay.
lights. Those so designed for that. So the way that we've worked as in our company and in the industry is to really talk about the why. Why are we doing this? Um, it's not because we said you have to, right? It's because of all the story. You got to tell the story, our story, Joe's story, and all the others that have traumatic brain injury and what that means to them, what it means to their families, what our boy's life has completely changed. He's, can barely communicate. His kids will never know their father
Ugh.
as a fully functioning adult, and it's tragic. It really is. It is, and you all know that it is, and it's so yes, we're making this change, but this is why, and
This
this is
is
why
why.
it's so important, and this is why we care about you as a person, and we want to make sure that you're adequately protected and there's something better. That's what we believe is a culture in a company, and I think more and more in our industry believe the culture is we need to protect and take care of our people
Well,
because
and
they're
one
our
of
most valuable asset. There's a big
absolutely,
shortage of workers, so we need every
absolutely,
single one. Every single one
absolutely.
needs to be healthy and protected, and that's the communication.
And when we say healthy and really protecting our most valuable asset, which is our people, and making sure that they're healthy, we're talking physically healthy and we're also talking mentally healthy, right? And so,
Exactly.
John, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about, because I know you've researched this, you've been part of studies. Could you talk a little bit about why this issue is so damn important to you? And then maybe the link between um, head injury and mental health, because I know that that's a really hot topic for you personally.
Yeah, sure. The point that Scott was making earlier is really kind of our starting ground level data that we can work from, and that is the CDC back in 2016 performed a study, and they looked at data in the construction industry from 2003 through 2010, and they saw that over 2,000 uh, deaths were related to TBIs in the construction industry, and that
Whoa. Whoa.
basically accounted for, as Scott indicated, approximately 25% of the construction fatalities in that time frame, and it was the leading category all other categories of fatalities in the construction industry. So that's just the big one to start off with from an industry
Yeah.
and a community and society standpoint. Um, from a personal standpoint, um, it's near and dear to me. Uh, Most of your listeners know my story, my family story. We lost my son John Jr. in March of 2017 to suicide as a result of traumatic brain injuries from high school soccer and football. And it is something that we saw him go through those changes in physical and mental health, as you were alluding to. Here was a all-state soccer player who had not used illegal drugs, starting to turn to illegal drugs in order to help with his chronic pain, and so it changes a person. From a physical standpoint, these TBIs. In his case, he had two concussions in junior year, but one from soccer, one from football. And at least two we know in senior year, and the two in senior year were 2 weeks apart, and they were both knockouts. And in 2010, we didn't know what we know now, and that would have never happened.
We didn't know
Now,
then what we know
hopefully,
now, right?
because we would have never let him back on the field, because he ended up with a bruise on top of a bruise, and that's known as second impact syndrome. And that's just a downward spiral in many cases. And his was for sure one that proved that. And so he had physical, issues, where light and sound and just things of that nature. He had cognitive issues where he was starting to forget things and became angry, really quick. That leads into the behavioral and emotional, where it became more and more aggressive. And so I know what those last 6 months were like for our family. I can't imagine what the last 6 years were like for him. I often tell people you got to do what you can do. You can't give up, because you never know if the solution's around the corner. As frustrating as it may be for both parties,
Right.
The victim as well as the family. But one thing I try to leave people with is that if there's one thing I can do, is if I can share my story and something connects and it gets to those individuals, that they become more proactive, then maybe they don't have to live the daily nightmare that my family lives. And so I really thank people like Joe and Scott for stepping out, because this is not an easy issue in a very traditional, male-dominated, macho kind of industry. I thank people locally, Nicole. One of your past guests, you know him, Bo Cooper, the safety director for Alberici,
Yep.
worldwide contractor. He stepped out and he's done the right thing. And, on the new St. Louis
That's right.
soccer stadium, that was a safety helmet job only, no hard hats. So
Wow. Wow.
it's changing a culture. It's not easy to do, but we got to keep after it, because I know it's much safer in the context of when we hear stories like Scott's story, and when people fall. Gosh, it's hard to guess what might have happened, but it's easy to know that what could have happened. It had that helmet still been strapped on his head, and so,
Well,
I,
and that's,
I'm
I mean,
hoping
that we
I
say that
addressed
all the
what
time,
you brought up.
John. Yeah. I mean, we say that all the time, that in prevention, any kind of prevention, the best work happens when nothing happens. Right. So, like, for us to be able to equip people with the safety helmets, yes, we want those numbers to go down, and it might take a little bit of time for those numbers to go down once implementation really starts picking up. But also, it's thinking about what injuries could or were prevented as a result of these helmets. So, Joe, I have
Right.
a question. So, is there anything that we can do as we're listening here, to help you all in your mission to, I would say, spread broad-based adoption of safety helmets? So if somebody's listening in their car, is there anything that we can do to help you in your fight?
Yeah, spread the word. Go to hardhatstohelmets.org, right, Scott? And go to our website.
Hardhatstohelmets.org.
Yeah, you
Okay.
can go to the website.
Awesome.
It's a one-stop shop. It's got all the information you need to help make the switch. We have a lot of information on there. We have testimonial information on there. A lot of members that have made the switch that have had incidents happen while wearing the helmets, that have explicitly said, had I not had a helmet on when this happened, the outcome would have been tremendously more tragic, and they probably wouldn't be there to tell that story. So that in and of itself, if you're not a believer in helmets, that will make you help them make that switch. That's probably Scott, you can speak up to that website as well. That in of itself, I think is probably the most powerful part on that website is those testimonial videos and just to see those incidents and hear about those stories. I mean, anything else on that website is gravy, but that information on there alone is enough to help anybody that might be on the fence on making that switch is enough to help out. But on
Awesome.
there, all kind of technical information, studies, frequently asked questions, it's all on there. It's just we're doing everything we possibly can to just help people answer the questions that they might have in their head, just to make that last apprehensiveness go away.
Absolutely. Yeah. Scott, I'm going to give you the final word. Is there anything that I should have asked that I didn't, or anything else that you want our listeners to really take away from with this conversation?
Well, I think as we've discussed and the great work your organization does, we do equate, physical health and mental health, particularly in the construction industry, where both physical health and mental health are under stress. We have a very, very high rate of suicide in construction. We have a very, very high rate of opioid addiction and deaths in construction. And, we're working so hard to attract people to our industry. We need more people. We have Infrastructure Act, we have CHIPS Act, we have billions and billions and billions of dollars to spend. And we can't do all this without people. And if we're out there telling people, well, if you don't get killed by, on the job, you might die by suicide. And if you don't die by suicide, then you might die by opioids. It's not a very attractive message. Yeah. So we have to work collectively to make changes, drastic changes, so that this is a safer, more attractive profession, because it's going to affect every single person in this country.
Absolutely.
We can't do what we set out to do, to resurrect our infrastructure, bring manufacturing home, all these great things that are now funded. It's not going to happen. So it is vitally important to each and every person. They might not think it affects them, but it affects them big time.
It affects the bridges that they drive on, the roads that they drive on, the buildings that they occupy. Infrastructure is unsexy, but without it, we suffer. I mean, we really do. And so I think, and I will be clear that you all have been doing this work for a long time around safety. This is not a way that you're trying to recruit and retain employees. This isn't a new thing that you all are doing, paying attention to the physical and mental health of your workforce because it's an in vogue thing to do. You all have been doing this for a very long time, and St. Louis is one of the industry leaders in paying attention to the physical and mental health of its construction industry. So I just want to make sure that that is abundantly clear for anybody listening that kind of thinks, you're all like, just you've joined the party late. No, you've been doing this for a long time, and this isn't just to get employees. This is to keep employees and make sure that the employees that you have, whether new or existing, are physically and mentally strong enough to do the work that our country needs. So you're not, showboating. Like you all have been doing this work for a long time.
Yes.
I am so incredibly appreciative of you, John, for suggesting this topic. I'm so incredibly grateful to you, Joseph, to you, Scott. I keep wanting to call you Joe.
That's
to you,
fine.
Joseph. Okay. To you, Scott, for taking time out of your day. If you want more information on this, please consider visiting hardhatstohelmets.org. And we are so grateful for listening. If you like more of what you heard, if you want other topics, if you're like, yes, this episode really resonated with me, please consider rating, reviewing, and subscribing to The Preventable. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us at The Preventable, brought to you ad-free by Prevent+Ed. Prevent+Ed works to reduce or prevent the harms of alcohol and other drug use through education, intervention, and advocacy. Please visit their website at prevented.org. Like what you heard? Rate, review, and subscribe to stay up to date with what we are serving on The Preventable.